Uh, Thank you, Chair, and can I just first of all thank the Political Academy of Science for this invite here today and for the initiative in getting all the mayors from around Europe to address this issue. The images of desperate men, women and children crowded onto inflatables, risking all to cross the Mediterranean agencies has impacted on the people of Dublin, as it sure has across the whole of Europe. It's perhaps, however, easier for Irish people to connect with the plight of these families than it was for some other people in Western Europe. For while my city and country has escaped the worst effects of war in recent decades, our people have a long historical memory of persecution, being forced to flee our homeland. In Dublin Docklands, there is a series of statues on the Custom House Quay, but they're not images of men cast in metal in heroic poses, but rather a group of forlorn, elongated figures dressed in tatters of clothing, one clutching a child to her breast, seemingly walking against a strong wind. And I'm trying to give you some understanding of the similarities that my people has faced and that of the modern day refugees, and how little the world has learned. Metres from these sculptures is moored a ship called the Jeannie Johnson. This is a replica of a so-called coffin ship. In the mid-19th century, these vessels operated across the law, outside the law, by criminal owners whose only motivation was profit. Cross the Atlantic Ocean from Ireland to North America, packed with families fleeing hunger and political strife. On these vessels, with little access to food or water, many succumbed to disease, with often nearly a third of passengers not surviving the treacherous passage, their bodies being thrown overboard, their deaths never recorded. No event in history has had a more profound effect on Ireland and the worldwide Irish community than the Great Famine that those statues and ship commemorate. During the tragic years of 1845 to 52, approximately 1 million people died and 1 million more emigrated from Ireland, causing the island's population to fall between 20 and 25%. But even beyond that tragic period, which every school child in Ireland learns about, we have a much longer and older history of being refugees in our own land and abroad, forced to move by the centuries-long struggle for political dominance of our island. Waves of Irish refugees have left their mark on the stories of many other countries. Some rose to importance and high rank while in the military service of Spain, France, Austria and Italy, after fleeing Ireland in the so-called flight of the wild geese of the late 17th century. Other waves of Irish people forced from their homeland have played a defining role in the societies of countries of both North and South America, as well as Australasia. This historical understanding of the plight of oppressed people has in modern period resulted in Irish people being leading contributors to missions to aid refugees abroad. From assisting the Palestinian people to fundraising drives, more often than not inspired by courageous priests and nuns, focused on assisting people suffering the effects of conflict in Africa and South America, the people of Dublin, and indeed the whole of Ireland, have never been found wanting in their charity. However, there is a long tradition in Dublin of realising the benefits of welcoming communities fleeing persecution and war. And I will just highlight two of these groups of refugees who have played a defining role in the modern story of Dublin, a city itself founded by people who now, these days, we call Norwegians. Huguenots were originally French Calvinists who departed from France in the 1680s due to persecution from their religious beliefs. Several thousands settled in Dublin. These families played a pivotal role in the creation of a modern city. Some, such as Latucha and the Lear families, played key roles in developing the city's banks and later being founded of the Bank of Ireland. Others would play important roles in literary and mercantile life. Over the centuries, the descendants of these former refugees became deeply integrated into society in Dublin, to such an extent that now most Dubliners who meet with Huguenot heritage are themselves Catholics, even though unwillingness to join this faith was the very reason their ancestors came to Ireland. Likewise, Jewish families fleeing political violence in Eastern Europe settled in Dublin in the late 19th and early 20th century. These people and their culture also became quickly part of the tapestry of Dublin life. The numbers settling were not large, but the descendants have played very prominent roles in the arts and politics of Dublin. For instance, in 1876, Lewis Warnser Harris was elected the first Jewish Lord Mayor of Dublin. Unfortunately, he died before he took up office, and it was 1956 that Robert Briscoe became the first man of that faith to hold the office. In stark contrast to the deeply unfortunate history of anti-Semitism elsewhere in Europe, it can be said that the Jewish community in Dublin has never faced a serious problem due to those poisonous beliefs which have never found an audience beyond the marginalised extreme fringes. More recently, Dublin has successfully accommodated communities fleeing the wars from former Yugoslavia and conflict in several African countries. These communities have also settled without having to deal with any organised political opposition beyond the few cranks and criminal elements who, once exposed, have been completely rejected by ordinary Dubliners. Although there is a proud tradition that Dublin can look back on in relation to accommodating refugees, it is not to say that the Irish state policy has not failed those in need in the past. In particular, there was little assistance offered to Jews seeking to flee to Nazi Germany in the 1930s. However, with Europe now facing a refugee crisis of a scale not experienced since the end of the Second World War, I believe my city is in a position to heed Your Holiness's advice delivered in September, that is, to welcome refugees into your homes and communities so that their first experience of Europe is not the traumatic experience of sleeping cold on the streets, but one of warm welcome. And at this place and time in history, there is great need for men and women who hear the cry of the poor and respond with mercy and generosity. Already, Dublin has displayed its deep-rooted traditions of charity. In recent weeks, the Irish government has announced that it will accept many more unaccompanied minors from the former migrant camp of Calais, which was recently dismantled by the French government. However, this decision by the government only came after vigorous campaigns on the issue by many groups, including refugee support groups and the trade union movement. There are currently many refugees a fortnight arriving in Ireland under the Irish Refugee Protection Programme. These individuals and families are quickly resettled into communities throughout the country and provided with government support. The relocation strand of the Irish Refugee Protection Programme is now interviewing many asylum seekers at a time in Athens every month for relocation to Ireland from Greece as a single group. Unfortunately for asylum seekers not arriving as part of this programme, they still face extended periods within the so-called direct provision system, where they are housed separate from local communities and provided funds which only allow bare subsistence. This system is facing growing opposition from ordinary people, with a recent march in Dublin attracting substantial numbers of people demanding its ending. Once again, thankfully, my city is proving to be an unforgiving environment for the xenophobia right. The hatred and fear inspiring politics of the likes of the UK's Nigel Farage, Pence in France, or similar individuals around Europe and the United States have been rejected at the ballot box and on the streets of Dublin. I took office shortly after the UK vote to leave the European Union. Accepting the honour of the office of Lord Mayor of Dublin, I stated that I was sickened to my core when during the EU referendum campaign I witnessed a poster portraying the suffering of men, women and children forced to become refugees being used as to entice intolerance and hate. I made it clear that anyone who would initiate, associate with or support the use of the suffering of their fellow human beings in such a manner for political gain is not welcome into my city. And I would here today encourage all the mayors to sign a charter which would once and for all send out a very clear message that the cities of Europe will not tolerate any more intolerance, hatred towards our fellow men. However, not only must we seek to play a role in ensuring that those forced to flee their homes to find societies willing to accept them and benefit from their presence, but we must work towards the real solution of the global refugee crisis. This is promoting peace rather than war. Dublin is the capital of a neutral country, a status that the majority of people cherish deeply. In this role, it can play and has played a role in assisting those seeking to develop the peace process around the globe. Taking a degree of inspiration from the successes of the peace process in Northern Ireland in recent years, my city has hosted delegations from various Middle Eastern and other countries seeking to meet in a neutral environment and discuss issues that have produced conflict. Only earlier this month, a delegation of senior clerical figures, Christian and Muslim, from Syria visited Dublin, where they highlighted the need for a fairer representation of that conflict in Western countries. Hopefully, my city can act as a bridge between many in Europe who see that conflict is simplistic in terms of discounting the human suffering that is being caused because it may be successful in undermining a supposed enemy of the West. I accept that as a city tucked away in the far corner of Europe, that we are not at the forefront as my colleague in Lesbos is in Greece. And can I just offer our solidarity, support in any way we possibly can to our colleagues in Greece and anywhere else who is confronting this issue on a daily basis. I believe Dublin, however, is in a position to show leadership on these issues and to make a real difference in the struggle to find a solution to this humanitarian crisis. It is my intention to do whatever I can to ensure that the city's approach to the current refugee crisis is in line with the best traditions of our past. For I believe that the current refugee crisis is a defining challenge that faces Europe, and that all progressive forces must work together to ensure that it is met with charity and humanity that His Holiness has correctly indicated is essential. It is not only those who need who will benefit from this, but also all our communities will be enriched. And I give a commitment here today to the mayors and to yourself, Chair, that when I return to Dublin, I'll be calling on our government to take up the mantle even more and to do what we can to try and assist our colleagues in the rest of Europe to put an end to this absolutely humanitarian crisis. I'd like to thank you for listening here today. Thank you.